And so begins the saga of our chair. We found it by the street side, waiting to be thrown away. We saved it from that, deciding to reupholster it. I think grandkids maybe had played with marking pins and marked up the fabric. The wood on the piece is quite nice and carved very nicely, but I think they had tried to restain the wood without removing the fabric. A quick inspection of the interior, the padding, and the base made me decide that this piece would be well worth the effort that it takes to reupholster it. I already have 2 buckskin hides, and we purchased a third one. We're planning on doing the inside and outside, the upholstery that's on the frame itself, in leather. We'll do the down cushion in a fabric, and that is yet to be determined what that fabric will be. The trick with removing the fabric is trying to keep it in one piece so that we can use it as a pattern later on. It'll be a lot easier than having to make a new pattern. Another part that I'm trying to be careful about is not damaging the finished wood that's out there. The wood on this piece feels to be in good, feels solid, feels to be in good shape. Looking at the natural color of the wood when it's unstained, I'm thinking it probably is a walnut. I'm pulling off the double welt around the back of the chair. It has been attached with hot glue. And an occasional staple to hold it in place. Chose to do this work out in the garage because taking this is kind of the part where we're going to make a mess. There's likely to be a lot of dirt. It's interesting to see what the fabric is underneath here, what the padding was. It looks like cotton with some sort of an animal hair maybe over top of it. Not sure. Doesn't look like we're going to have, the chair has been reupholstered once. I could tell that earlier on just from the way that this corduroy fabric was put on, that this was a reupholstery job already that I'm taking off. The stretcher fabric here is a graph fabric. As I'm pulling the back padding away, I can see that the jute is intact under here. So that's all a good sign. Looks like things are in pretty good shape. I really want that to stay in place, so I'm going to snug it back up in there. I really, if the padding is good and clean, and this, compared to padding in chairs, is good and clean and reusable, I don't have to do anything to that. Okay, more exploration. We brought the little chair inside. She's turning out to be more of a little zombie than we realized. While the fabric on the back came off easily, the fabric on the inside is attached with rusted nails and rusted staples. It's going to take quite a while to get all this taken apart. Removing the nails and staples is proving to be a challenge. One of the challenges is to find the right tool to get them out, and not doing any damage to the wood.
I've just uncovered the arm corner here, and I have the original fabric. I have a cotton over another cotton, and then we have the original horsehair and a straw type bat next to the jute.
We decided that it might be a good time to flip the chair over and take a look at the base construction of it. So we taped the fabric back on in place to hold the padding where it belongs, and also to keep trouble out of the way. It's kind of like unwrapping a Christmas gift. You really don't know what you're going to find inside. I can see that I've got jute webbing underneath here. And springs. It all seems to be in pretty good shape. The springs are attached to the jute by use of staples. Probably the person who reupholstered this last was a reupholstery shop. The jute webbing base looks to be in pretty good condition. I opened up the space between the springs and looked inside. The springs are 8-way hand tied on the top. It all seems to be pretty well attached together and sound. The one repair that I have found on the frame of the chair is that the corner blocks either have been added near the leg or have been replaced near the leg. This should help to stabilize the frame and strengthen the frame, so I have no problem with that, and we'll leave those alone. As we're exploring this piece of furniture to figure out how it all went together, I discovered that there is a wire, a tension wire here, attached with a piece of leather to the frame, holding it in place. This piece of fabric is the inside back. This piece of fabric is the deck that's coming forward. The corduroy fabric was the original face fabric. They attached a piece of scrap fabric to it as a stretcher to pull it under the wire, back through here in that space, and once the deck is attached first by tacks to the frame, then the inside back piece was tacked on top of that to the frame. So as we reupholster this, we'll duplicate that process. That's why I take things apart slowly, looking for how the attachments were made, so I can duplicate that process when I reupholster it. It was interesting when we got to the top of the deck, and there's a stitching line. So as I was removing the fabric, I noticed that they had sewed a strip of fabric to the back and then stitched through the strip of fabric to hold this seam and to pull it down into place and create the edge roll. I'm planning on having leather out here and a muslin or a contrasting deck material on the interior. So I will actually have a seam where two pieces of fabric come together, but then I'll have a piece that's left in the back that I can stitch through. As I'm removing the fabric on the deck first, I realize that I'm going to have to maintain the integrity of the fabric on the inside back panels. Keeping that fabric intact is going to keep the padding from the deck from commingling with the padding from the inside arms and the inside back until after I have my new fabric applied. So I went ahead and used some tape to tape the fabric back into place temporarily so that I can continue this process. And the deck is going to be the first part that's going to get reupholstered. As it turns out, there are 3 layers of stitching down here. One layer of stitching goes through the jute that covers the springs. It's a running stitch that forms the perimeter roll. The next layer of stitching goes underneath the running stitch through the jute, back up through the seam allowance on the fabric, the extra piece that's added to the bottom, and then back down underneath the stitching through the jute. So it follows that line. The third line of stitching catches the opposite side when the stitching comes through the seam allowance. That row of stitching keeps the tension on the stretch from breaking the fabric. So they very ingeniously put a process together to hold it down tight. But there are 3 separate lines of stitching that are creating that shape and roll in the deck. Well, it's day 2 of the process. And I'm working on the outside arm right in here. This piece of fabric represents the deck fabric that's being pulled through. This piece of fabric represents the inside arm that is pulled under a metal wire. Using a little pry bar, sometimes a hammer, to try to drive that little pry bar in underneath a nail. And I've been working on this one to get it freed up, so now it's going to, work its way out. Another tool that I've been using occasionally to get some of these nails and tacks out is a little nail cutter that has a nice little gripping teeth on it there that can reach in and grab the head of that tack and pull it out. One down, a whole lot more of them to go. As these are coming out, basically I'm discovering there's another tack under there. Yeah, more to go. Now that I have enough of the tacks removed to expose this area, let's talk about what we see here. There is some stitching that is holding the padding on the inside into place on this arm. The burlap is actually sewn to this heavy steel wire. There are stitches here that are holding it into place. And this is the outside back. This is the fabric from the inside arm that is coming through, and I have that pretty well freed up and those tacks gone. We're going to leave that in place. Now this right here, I can slide my hand in and it shows back up. It goes completely through and over to the seat side. Oftentimes this is where there's going to be a lot of dirt accumulation, a lot of stuff that falls in that crack between the seat and the back that stuff disappears into. I'm working on getting the rest of these tacks freed up and getting the seat cushion itself, the fabric that is over the deck and over the seat, taken apart, and then I'll slide it out. At that point, I'm going to be sewing a new piece to replace this one, and that's going to be the first piece of fabric that we'll put on here. But still have a lot of tacks to pry out. You're looking at the seat deck at the inside of the chair, and with help, I am, now that all of the nails are free, I'm pulling the deck out while Bob holds the inside back in place so that it doesn't move. I'm trying not to disturb the padding, as well as you can see that I'm bringing up a lot of dirt and debris and stuff, so I'm trying to keep the dirt and the debris kind of on top of the fabric so I don't have to deal with it any further. I don't really want it down in the padding because I'm not planning on replacing the padding, so I'm trying to keep most of the dirt and debris up on top. And we're getting lots of help as we strip everything off of the chair. Kat's absolutely fascinated by all the treasures we're finding down here. The fabric that covered the deck of the chaise lounge is now gone. We took it outside, shook it out really well, brushed it off since there was a lot of debris that we rolled up inside it, and I will now begin to use that to create a pattern to sew together a new piece to go on the deck. From the back side of the chair, you can see that the wood is exposed, and this is a great time to focus on getting the wood in perfect condition. If we need to do any patching, restaining, this certainly would be an appropriate time to do any repair work that was discovered. I feel very fortunate that I haven't made any discoveries on this chair that require repair. So touching up the wood before we begin to put any new fabric on, as well as looking for more of those furniture tacks that were holding the previous fabric down and spending more time removing as many of those as we possibly can so that we have space for fresh tacks as we reapply new fabric. Here's a close-up of that wood so that you can take a look at what all of that looks like up close. And apparently the camera can't focus at that. There, that's a little better. You can see that there's going to be a lot of nail holes, just a lot of little stuff to clean up. Before I began the work on the removing the deck material, I carefully set aside the padding that was used in the outside arms and the outside back. That way, since the padding is basically pretty clean, and it's, from an antique standpoint and preservation standpoint, it's definitely better to reuse the padding rather than purchasing new padding. So I'll reuse as much of this as I possibly can, and I don't think I'm going to have to add a lot of new material in to fluff it out. We've covered our pool table with mattress pads, which creates a nice large work surface that's protected. I've laid out one of the nice larger hides, and while these pieces are pulled from the outside back, I'm looking at them to see if this one hide will provide enough leather for the inside by itself. The tanning process of the hides causes a little bit of color variation. I have two other hides that I plan to use for the outside back and arms of the chair, but I'm glad to see that the pattern pieces I took off the chair are going to fit, and I will be able to cut the inside pieces out of this one hide. Well, on one of the two original hides that we had, it is 11.5 square feet, and again I am able to get the inside arm pieces and the inside back pieces laid out on it, and that's going to work quite nicely. Our second hide has a little bit more character to it. There's a few holes in it where the shot went through it before it was tanned, and I will use it to create the side pieces of the deck fabric. I can find good sections of the deck of this, and only from this line out really needs to be leather, so I'll be able to pull these strips out of the hide, and where the original fabric, or at least this reupholstery version of the fabric, had sewn or seamed a small tacking piece on here, this was where they created the edge roll along the perimeter of the deck. They sewed it down to this piece. I will seam my leather to a sort of coordinating deck piece of fabric. It's an extra piece that I had that I'm going to reuse. It's a Krypton suede fabric, 1 yard, and I will use this to create the dimensions from here and then all the way up through the top out of this coordinating fabric. That way I don't need leather for it, save myself a little bit of money, as this one hide would not be big enough to do the entire deck. And while these first two hides were purchased at $28.50 each a few years ago when we were at a rendezvous in New Mexico, the first hide that I showed you cost me $100 this weekend. So the price is something that you need to take into consideration. After I've carefully laid my original piece of fabric out, I'm using it as a pattern and marking my cutting line. In addition, I found that it's very, very helpful to mark the easing cuts that have to be made or that the previous upholsterer made in the fabric. That way I feel a little bit more comfortable when I have to cut a big chunk in the fabric to make it fit. In addition, you can see here that the previous upholstery fabric, the corduroy, the upholsterer was probably a little bit short on the piece of fabric, so he sewed on, and the thickness of the fabric with the corduroy would have been a concern too. He sewed on a stretcher piece of fabric. I'm just going to use this base fabric because it's strong. It's not very thick, and I'll just make it one piece versus having a separate piece sewn on as a stretcher. But it's a good tip to know that when you're short on fabric, you can add a little bit to allow it seam on a little piece to allow it to reach to wherever you've got to tack it at. I wanted to show you that down here on the fabric, this will be leather. This section, so I'm marking where my stitching line will be. I will then decide on my seam allowance of 1/2 inch or maybe 1 inch, and I'll mark a cutting line that is outside of that. I'm cutting the piece of fabric free from the original piece, the corduroy piece that was on the chair. But I'm cutting the section that I'm going to do in leather free from the piece that will be done in the alternative or coordinating deck fabric. That way I will be able to easily use that to pattern on my piece of leather. And one of the reasons I need to have it cut free is because that way I can work around the blemishes in the leather a little bit easier, because I won't be trying to use such a large piece and I can see those blemishes. And in addition, this piece is probably, the leather piece will probably have to have a seam in it somewhere for this size piece to be created. And this will allow me to make my best decision on where that seam is going to be. As I am working on this, I am adding in a 5/8 inch seam allowance beyond my seam lines. Getting ready to go ahead and do my cuts. I'm marking this on the reverse of the suede. Took quite a bit of figuring out to come up with the way that the patterns would lay and all fit on the fabric. When it comes to cutting the fabric, I am definitely a believer in measure twice, cut once. I've checked, I've double checked, triple checked. Now I'm starting to cut the leather in preparation for getting the upholstery done. My sewing machine doesn't like leather, so it's a little bit hard to work with. I have to be sure to use a sturdy needle, a high quality thread, and I have to help the machine along a little bit as it takes the stitches. It doesn't like to sew through the leather by itself. I have the stitches per inch set to a smaller number, so I'm only taking 7 or 8 stitches per inch, and I'm helping the feed dogs to feed the fabric through, so I'm going to keep helping along on that to keep it going. There's a lot of sewing to get these pieces ready to go on the chair. In addition to the other problems with leather, just the toughness of the leather and the difficulty of a standard machine in sewing it, another issue you have to be very careful about is to be sure that any time you pin leather, you have to pin only in the area that's going to be the seam allowance, because if you push a hole through the leather, you have a permanent hole there. I will be glad when this part of the process is done. deck fabric is sewn together. We have a contrasting deck with the leather going over the edges. We're using the same twine that stitched it down, the original piece down, and repeating the pattern that of stitching that they had developed, so that we'll get this one attached as well. Well, with the help of a curved needle, a couple of nice sized straight needles, some twine, some hemostats to pull the needles through, we were able to finish the stitching, and we have this now attached to the base cushion. Getting ready to work in the corner now and create the release cut that's going to be needed to allow the seat fabric, as it tucks in, to go around the back post. What I did was pull the fabric tight and cut it right here. If you can see the shape of that release cut, so that it can be tucked in and folded under and then pulled through to work its way around the post. I have the fabric pulled tight in that corner. There are going to be 2 more release cuts. There is a center back post right here, so I will have to untuck the fabric and do a release cut at that position. And I'm basing where I'm putting the cut at just on my alignment and where I can feel the back post at. I'm going to move the camera to the back side and show you where that fabric is coming through at. This is again the fabric that is on the inside face, and here's the piece that I just performed the release cut on, that I'm now able to pull back through here and fold those edges under in preparation for tacking them. This piece will be tacked down along this top edge here. After the deck is finished, then I will remove the interior back face fabric. We're getting the rough tacking done here. The leather needs to be pulled across and tacked into place. We're planning on a piece of cording to give us the finished look across there. This is the outside back of the chair, and you can see where the deck fabric has pulled all the way through now and has been tacked down on that back rail. Next step's going to be to remove the inside back fabric. Check out that padding that's up there. Cut those pieces that will replace them once I have the fabric as the pattern, and then attach those. Working with one of the hides, the buckskin hides, I have positioned the fabric pieces that I removed from the chair on the hide as a pattern, carefully working around any problems that are there, any small holes. After the pattern is cut around, and I added about 1/4 of an inch perimeter around the original pattern, that way I can turn the edge of the leather under a little bit when I nail it into place on the chair. I am tacking along the perimeter here, just kind of trying to position it into place initially. Have already cleared most of the staples out of the way, but I just found another one here from the original. So there that one goes. The hemostats work well in terms of holding the upholstery tack. I'll come back with decorative nail head trim later, but initially I'm just trying to get it held into position, tacked into place. And I'll keep working on this. Get a few more tacked into place along the back here. Then I will tuck all of the excess leather down here. I left all of the additional edges, rather than cutting it off, whatever extra length was left on the hide, I just left it attached. I'm going to use that as my stretcher basically to pull that leather through and under. Well, I have the tacking done, and I'm ready to move the tails underneath here. Looks like I'm going to have some help. As you and my kitten can see, hand goes all the way through here. I'm going to have to trim off a lot of this piece. So I'm going to have to make a decision about that pretty soon, and then pull through what I need. I want to be sure I leave enough. After feeling the width of the wood arm and where there is no place for the leather to go, I kind of know I want to cut a release cut about across here. It's always kind of scary, in my opinion, to make a cut. You can't recover from that if you mess it up. Fold the raw edge, the edge I just cut, back under. Let's see if that works. It's looking pretty good. This is the back side, the outside edge, and the piece of leather that I've been pulling through here. You can see that the deck material is already tacked down. The next thing is going to be to tack down this material, the leather that is coming from the inside arm. It goes underneath the wire that you can see here that offers separation. And I want to give it a good tug because suede leather does stretch quite a bit. Kind of hard to get a good spot here where I hit good wood there. Where this chair has been reupholstered several times. The quality of the wood and the availability of strong, sturdy wood is getting to be a little bit tricky. Well, I have the rough stretch in and positioning of the first piece of leather completed, and the next process is going to be to continue this on the other arm and then finish it up with the center back. This chair has a center back post, and now that I have the leather roughly tacked into place almost down to that center back section, I need to make a release cut in the leather to go around that center back post. It's always kind of scary making those cuts. I can feel the center back post here. I've positioned the leather so that it's laying fairly straight and true so that I'm making a pretty straight cut. And I think that will do it. Looks good. Here's the back of the chair, the outside back, and I have the outside of the arms covered. I still need to work to re-stretch and smooth the leather just a little bit. I'm going to reattach or replace, I suppose is a better word, the batting and padding that came out of this inside back, and I've decided to use some blue tape to hold it there temporarily as I begin to put the final piece of leather on the frame of this chair. I'm just going to reuse the existing padding, but I need to be able to hold it into place while I'm working, and its gravity is not helping me, so put a few pieces of tape here that'll be obvious to remove later. And I really like the blue painter's tape because it's, well, it may work better let's hope. Holding it here temporarily. There, that should do it. Okay. Folded my piece of leather here so I know where center line is of it. And I can see center line on the back of the chair, which gives me an obvious place to start at in terms of the placement of my first tack. And once I get, half dozen perimeter tacks worked in here, I should be able to remove the blue tape and this will be supported back in on its own. I am still trying to decide how I'm going to cover the nails. Debating between a heavier duty nail, and my first attempt is not always a good one in terms of getting the nails set. So I'm going to have to nail that one in a little more. And the fact that this already has a lot of nail holes in it, because it's had several reupholstery jobs, that also means that my first attempt does not always hit a sound piece of wood. So, first nail is in, and get a couple more positioned and in. And I'll be able to remove the tape. I cut all my pieces a little bigger than I thought I would need them. Certainly better to have a little bit more excess to work into edges than to find out that I needed an additional ½ inch of length or something at some point. The hemostats seem to be magnetized. Now, I don't know if that happened as a process from just working with them, or if they really were magnetized. They are now. I know the hammer's supposed to be magnetized. Tack hammer, I can get it tacked to stick to the head of it, but it's never in the right place when I actually get ready to drive the tack home. So that in mind has led me to decide to use the hemostats, that gives me better tack positioning. Besides that, I get a little bit distracted every now and then. Looks like if I want my tacks to be in the box, that would be a great time to be distracted. Now that I've finished getting the leather placed on the chair and temporarily tacked into position, I'm going to start patterning the cushion fabric. The cushion fabric is a sturdy fabric. It is being recycled from a previous project, and I have just barely enough to make this work for the cushion, but I like the idea of having the cushion in a upholstery fabric, and the background of the chair, the frame of it, done in the leather. Over time, when I get ready to move the chair to a new location, do something different with it, it's not a huge deal to remake another cushion cover for this chair. I took apart, carefully ripped apart the old previous cushion cover, so I had a piece of fabric to use as a pattern. I have cut the top face and the bottom face of the cushion so it will be reversible. I have also purchased some cording that I will use. It's a small cord with lip that I will use at the top and the bottom seams of the boxing. And I have the boxing cut and ready to go. I've measured several times on this to verify that I could get everything done out of the pieces of fabric that I have available. As you can see, there's not much left over. That small pile on the end of the table here is all I have left over as scrap at this point, so it was just the perfect amount to finish up this project, and I'm glad that I had saved this extra piece of fabric from leftover from a client's job. I'm getting ready to start the sewing process here, and I purchased a 48-inch, it's actually a coat zipper. I'm going to use about 42 inches of this. It's kind of an interesting zipper because it does have a pull or zipper at both ends of the zipper. It's a nice long zipper. I've had good success with these nylon zippers on previous projects, so I tend to go back to what works for me. And the sewing part is never, as far as I'm concerned, the fun part of the process. I enjoy seeing things come together. But I do have the boxing that's going to make the zipper put together, and basically with applying zippers, if you've not done it before, there are directions on that process and you can look it up in a sewing book. My sewing machine that I use is a 50-year-old Singer sewing machine, and as I was finishing the process of setting up for this zipper, it dawned on me that someone who doesn't know how to put in a zipper probably will soon find themselves in over their heads in terms of this process. The first thing that I did was to baste the seam with a contrasting colored thread. That will make the seam a little bit easier to remove later on. And now I am following the edge line. There's kind of a different direction of stitch that gives you a sewing line on the edge of a zipper. And so I am visually following that line. I'm trying to take 10 stitches per inch is what I have my machine set on. And I have changed over to the zipper foot, so I'm hoping that I have good success with this. I don't like the sewing part of it, but it's a part that has to get done in the process. I've got the zipper sewn, to the reverse behind the seam that I had closed with a basting stitch. And the next trick is to rip that stitch out and open up the zipper, and hopefully it's going to look great. I feel pretty good about it at the moment. The coordinating thread that I purchased to match my fabric is matching quite nicely. So once I get the zipper done, I can begin to work on attaching the cushion boxing to the cushion, face and back pieces. I have the boxing pinned with the welt, the cord with lip, inside. The two pieces of fabric are faced together. I have the presser foot positioned, the thread ready to go, and I'm ready to start sewing. I'm going to sew this with a long stitch, a basting stitch to begin with. That way, if I make an error, I can come back and it will be easy enough to correct and take out. After I baste all the way through the process, then I will come back and put in a second line of stitching. I know from experience that it's really hard to work with a piece of cording and to get it attached smoothly. So I'm hoping for the best. I've already carefully pinned it and done some easing cuts. I'm hoping that I can work my way around all of these corners. Really won't know for sure how it comes out until I open it up and take a look at the results. The change that I've made here is that I now have added on the piece that contains the zipper or the zipper boxing. I folded the end of the first layer of boxing back. Now I've added in the zipper boxing, which is going beyond that, so that when this is finished, the tail of the zipper will tuck in under a fold or flap on the boxing. Well, what have I done since the last time I turned the camera on? I top stitched my first seam after I repaired any spots that needed to be repaired when I was basting it. I then basted on my welt cord to the boxing. Then I've basted stitched the face, cushion face, to the welt and the boxing. At that point, I had to open the zipper up in the zipper boxing so that I could turn it right side out because I had been working from the wrong side of everything, the reverse of the fabric, to stitch. And I'm feeling pretty good about things. I will, this line of stitching here on the connection between the face fabric and the boxing, you can maybe see that it's the cord. I'm not real tight on the cord yet, but I've only basted this seam. So now that I'm satisfied that basically it's a straight seam and the cord is caught where I want it to be caught at, I'm going to reverse everything again, turn it back inside out, and then I'm going to re-stitch this line. I'll use, when I'm using the final stitch, the finished stitching line, I'm going with 12 stitches per inch. My basting stitch I'm doing at 7 to 8 inches, or stitches per inch. So with 12 stitches per inch, I'll get a nice seam. And that's what I'll be ready to start soon, and that's the last thing. Then I can call the cushion done. I wanted to show a section of the stitching in process here. Mainly so I could show that I can feel the welt cord underneath here, and I can certainly see my line of basting stitch. It's much easier to stitch a straight line now that all of the pins are taken out, because the pins were holding it together while I was doing the basting stitch. And of course the machine sometimes, as it stitches over a pin, might wiggle a little bit in the straightness of the line of the stitch. So now that those are gone and the basting stitch and the cord are all that is there, it makes it a lot easier to feel where the cord is, to be sure that I am snugging everything up against the presser foot and getting a nice, what I hope will be a nice look with the cord when I'm finished. When I go around a corner, which is just what I've done here, I also reinforce the corner. That means that I'm going to stitch backwards and back my way around the corner again, because I know I'm going to need to clip that corner a little bit for it to lay smooth. And if I have reinforced my corner by stitching my way back around it and then coming back forwards again, that way I won't have to worry about clipping the corner and having the fabric pull out or not be strong enough there a little bit. I'm not going to clip anything, inside curves or outside curves, very close. I will leave, while I will clip them, I will only clip them to maybe 1/8 of an inch of the stitching line is the closest that I will get. And I might just clip someplace between 3/16 and 1/8 of an inch into the stitching line. I think that will be sufficient for the curves to lay smooth on the cushion and yet help to retain the strength that is obviously important in a piece of upholstery furniture. And the good news is, that's it. Hopefully everything works and fits the cushion. Now that the cushion is complete, and I have put it on here to see that it fits. I have set that aside, and I'm working on finishing up the actual inside and outside back and the base of the chair. I have a coordinating piece of braid. This is sometimes referred to as gimp, and I'm using that to cover up the nail head trim that is here, or the upholstery tacks that I put down as a initial stretch-in procedure. And I'm going to be continuing on now with the bronze colored finish nails. Okay, I think this gives you a good view of the process. Again, I'm using the hemostats to hold the nail head trim, the bronze furniture nails, getting them aligned with each other as they go up this column is a challenge. The other thing that I'm finding is a challenge is every so often I hit a hole left in the frame from previous attachments, previous nails that have been on this frame since it's been upholstered, reupholstered, and at least this is the third fabric that I can tell for sure was on this chair. And when I hit those holes, getting the nail to go in at the angle I want it to go in and at the exact position I want it to go in is a little bit challenging. Having the nails held by the hemostat gets my hands out of the way. So, getting at least the rough positioning of all of these nails in, taken care of. It will be a lot easier when I'm not having to align immediately next to another row of nails like I am going up the back. Right now I have to deal with the fact that if in this row of nails one hit a hole that was left from a previous reupholstering and it moved a little bit, then I need to position my nail accordingly so that they look like a matched set. I'm not sure I'm fully happy with, it's not too bad. I'm not fully driving them home yet. That way I'll have a chance to go back, look at them, and give them that final 1 or 2 taps later. Right now I am leaving enough space that if I need to get a nail out, I can get a screwdriver in here and work it out without too much difficulty and pry it loose from its position. And basically, this is going to take a little bit of time. The first purchase of 25 pieces per box, we bought out the local store of all of the bronze nails they had a week ago. when we started this process, I've gone back and bought all of the boxes of nails that they have in their first restocking of the nails. I think I have enough now to finish the project, and I'll probably have a couple boxes I take back. But every so often, a nail head breaks off, or the shank of the nail twists or bends or something like that, and has to be discarded. So I'm not really sure if I have enough yet or not. Keeping my fingers crossed and going to continue to work on this. While I've tried, in most cases, to leave the tacking, positioning tacks, upholstery tacks in place, I have figured out that to position this nail properly, the head's right on top of that positioning tack for the leather. And I intentionally left those tacks a little bit loose, so I either need to come back and, tack them in harder to get them flat, or, since this one needs to be removed, that allows me to pry it out. Sure enough, I am going into that hole. Luckily, the decorative nails are bigger, longer, so I can drive them in. I'm kind of positioning the head using the nail to look at it first upside down. Then I visually spot the next connection on the gimp that's going to give me the correct positioning, and place the nail, hold it with the hemostat, and I'm having to hold the hemostat in a position so that I'm not, if I nail against the wood or position the hemostat against the wood and hit it, I'm marking up the finished wood. So I'm trying to avoid doing any damage. Okay. Here are some other tools that are going to come in handy. As I was using my box of 25 upholstery nails, out of 25 upholstery nails, this is the number that I had to pry out, pull out, cut out, basically because as they hit a harder piece of wood, the shaft of the tack bends, lays over, it ends up in the nail head ends up in the wrong place, in the wrong position. When that happens, you have to very carefully pry it out, being sure not to damage either the braid that you're positioning it through, or the wood, or the leather. So the job is a little bit more frustrating than it might seem. Again, this is one of those differences that a professional might be more efficient at this than I am as an amateur upholsterer. The good news is that I am now finished with the inside of the chair. And while on close-up you can notice that maybe a few nails could be shifted a little bit, at a distance, it's looking really good. And I'm very, very pleased with the overall effect at this point. There's a lot of braid to go around the exterior of the chair, and that's the next challenge. While in interior design, we are always thinking about the problems that can be associated with dye-lot matches in fabrics, I hadn't planned on having to deal with 2 boxes of furniture nails, same number, purchased the same place, that are not only different colors. The ones on the left are the ones that I have been using and the color range that I have been using. The ones on the right are significantly browner, darker colored, and they're smaller. Oh well, I may get to go shopping again to another location of this particular hardware store, trying to find boxes of the specific nail head that I need to have. These are the same number, but apparently different shipments from the manufacturer. There was not quality consistency from one to the next. There are always unexpected challenges in every project that have to be dealt with. We are glad to finally have our chair finished.